Alrighty guys, in today's video we're going to be discussing what to look out for when you're going to buy one of these trucks. So in this example, this truck's not exactly the greatest one to use since I'm parting it out, but I thought I'd honestly bring you along and point out the specs that I found wrong with this truck as I've owned it, and I've seen online as well with other people. Alright, so first and foremost, we're going to get up underneath here in the hood. Now this truck is equipped with a 4.7 Magnum. They're pretty common in trucks pretty much anything later than 2000 when it was introduced. 5.2 went to the wayside that year, and the 5.9 Magnum was still kind of floating around at that time. You could still buy the 3.9 Magnum, and the 3.7 didn't replace it until 2003. These Magnum engines are a quite solid platform. The only downside is they do have a few minor defects here and there. The 4.7 Magnums tend to overheat quite often and like to throw out head gaskets, and another side effect completely different of the overheating problem is that the timing chains like to fail on these rigs and just pretty much wreak havoc up front. Another pretty severe symptom these trucks have is that the exhaust manifolds like to break loose and tick, as you'll see here. Pretty bad sometimes. 5.2s and 5.9s can get this problem as well, but it's not as often. It's actually nowhere near as often, but they still get them every now and then. The 5.2 and 5.9's major problems usually range from anything from the intake plenum gasket leaking, which is the gasket for the intake manifold here where it mates on the block. That leaks and it draws in engine oil and starts burning oil like crazy. Or you can have head gasket problems as well, but that's not as likely as the 4.7 or 3.7. Pretty much a good way to compare it is that the 5.2 and 5.9 are the larger brothers to the 3.9. The 3.9 is just a 5.2 with two cylinders chopped off on the front. Same goes for the 4.7 versus the 3.7. 3.7 is just two cylinders chopped off of the 4.7. So this truck is equipped with the 4-speed 45 RFE transmission that was paired behind the 4.7 Magnum V8s. Truth be told, transmissions in these trucks are quite a weak spot. Unless you buy a stick shift, you're pretty much guaranteed to have a transmission failure. If you're lucky, you might get up to 300,000 out of your automatic transmission if you're lucky and it's been well maintained, etc., etc. But I have yet to see maybe one or two instances in a blue moon of that happening. Especially in this truck's case, this is one of the reasons why I parked it. The last reason I'll get to a little later was what killed it off. But this transmission developed an overdrive problem where I could throw it in drive, take off down my driveway, have all three gears before overdrive, be perfectly fine. I get out on the road, and as soon as it tries to shift into overdrive, it'll throw me right into limp mode, and now I'm stuck in third gear until the truck shuts off and sits for a few minutes. So, whoopee. I never really got around to truly fixing it, and like I said, there were more reasons why I just never bothered to continue with trying to fix it, which I'm sure some of them are kind of already apparent now. The automatics ranged from a 42, a 44, a 46 RE. On the older style engines, the 5.2, 5.9, and 3.9. With the newer engines, the 4.7 got mated to the 45 or the 545 RFE transmission, which was the transmission released with the Grand Cherokees and the 4.7 in 1999. Then was brought over to these trucks in 2000. And truth be told, they may be a little bit slightly newer transmission design with a little bit more electronics, but I'm still personally not impressed by the performance of them. I see people with problems all the time with them, and I've personally encountered problems with them. So therefore, I'm not entirely a great advocate for them. If you do buy a truck with a manual, make sure the clutch is in good shape and your synchros don't grind whenever you go to change gears. Other than that, the 5 speeds are pretty much bulletproof compared to the automatics. So as for the front and rear ends on these trucks, in this case I have a 4-wheel drive unit with the Chrysler 925 or 9.25 inch rear end with 355 rear end gear, open differential. The rear differential pretty much in the back of these guys is indestructible. You just about can't kill them. And the same goes for the transfer case, and in this one it's an NP233. And the front differential on this, you just about can't kill them as well. The difference between the earlier and later style interiors, which we'll get into here in a little bit later, this one's electronically shifted and controlled versus the manually controlled and vacuum controlled older style linkage on the Dakotas. Now, as for failure rate when it comes to an IFS front suspension versus say like the solid axle of the larger counterparts on the 1500 and above, These trucks are about 50-50 with your suspension. You're either going to get a really good one or a really bad one, and in my case, my entire front end on this truck needed to have been gone through. But like I said, problems led me to where I didn't ever get to that. But CV axles will sometimes fail. The ball joints are pretty notorious for failing often. Brakes are pretty decent on these trucks, honestly, versus others. Brake lines tend to rust out, which that's pretty apparent with this rig that it got it pretty bad. It's had brake lines replaced before. Now, another point most people don't recognize is that four-wheel drives contain a torsion bar spring setup here versus a coil over shock type. The two-wheel drives are equipped with pretty much the exact same setup, minus the fact that you don't have a torsion bar, but you do have a coil spring. Obviously no four-wheel drive, no CV axle, but pretty much everything else is the same. Four-wheel drive's rack and pinion steering, and two-wheel drive will be gearbox. And I wouldn't quote me to that because I'm pretty sure the later ones, if I remember right, switched to rack and pinion as well. Rear ends on these trucks, like I said, are pretty solid. There's not really much that needs to be done on them besides just basic maintenance and keeping up on them. Wouldn't hurt to check your U-bolts because those have been replaced on this truck once already, and as you can tell, they didn't really last very long in the Midwest here. So, yeah, please go check your U-bolts if you live in the Midwest and have this much rust. Alright, so next we'll focus on the exterior, which is pretty much going to be your biggest problem for cosmetics, other than rust. The biggest point I can come up with straight out of the gate will be clear coat peel. These early Chryslers from the 2000s are downright horrible for it. And this is what clear coat peel looks like right here. You can get the kind of shiny paint there, and then it starts fading to white, and then it gets nice and rough underneath there, and you got paint comes off on your fingers. It's pretty easy to tell if it has clear coat paint just from like standing back about 5 feet, which for some reason to this day, of which I can't explain, I'm gonna guess that they replaced the roof skin or painted it over. But the roof skin on this truck has been painted at one point. Once again, another example of clear coat peel on the side of the bed. Also on the top side of the roof on the other side. If you peel back my weather stripping a little bit, you can see that it's had a second layer of paint put on it. So at some point this truck's been repainted there. So the stiffness of the sheet metal when it comes to impacts and other sorts of damage like that, like say that little dent I had right over there in the back quarter panel, well, the metal's pretty robust, but at the same time it's not. If you get them in the right spots, they'll bend pretty easy, but other times you have to hurt the crap out of them to really even think about bending. The headlights on these trucks are kind of notorious for being junk, although they can be pretty decent if you don't have lenses like mine and just have minor cosmetic issues that just could be remedied pretty quickly. Plastics on the front bumper are relatively robust. I've run over poles with it and yanked out the clips before I broke it, so that's got to say something there. And here is the biggest point on this truck that I absolutely loathe. I could care less about the clear coat paint peel or even the sticker here peeling off, because they're pretty bad about that too, which I know I didn't mention that. It just struck me in the head now, but most of the time they don't come off though. Is rust. This stuff, this wonderful, beautiful stuff right here known as rust. Free rate reduction, speed holes, guide holes, whatever you want to call them. It's also known as corrosion, aka rust. This stuff is the killer of these Chryslers, and I wish I wasn't lying, but every single truck from back then has this issue. It may not be to this extent, however, but it's still an issue, and especially up here in the cab corners. This one's not even a club cab, or this one's not even a quad cab or a single cab, but the sides are just absolutely gone. And before you ask if I installed that little trash bag and spray foam setup, no, I did not. That was the previous owner or owners. I have no idea. All I know is that they were preventing nothing. But this truck originally had fender flares on it. It was an SLT with the two-tone gray and maroon, and had the gray fender flares front and rear. I took them off, and this one kind of forcefully came off, so then that made me take the rest of them off, so at least it kind of matched. Although it doesn't anymore, but that's beside the point. Yeah, that's just first glance stuff. That right there is the stuff you want to be worried about. That and your leaf springs back here. Those are probably the biggest points of contention. And the third place might be your bed mounts, but for some reason this one's actually not in terrible shape here. But the frame right where it meets here, there's a two-piece for the rear section and the front section. I'm going to guess that you Chrysler did that so you could have different cab configurations and just lengthen it out and make it easy for them. But right here where it splits, on both sides, they can blow out like this, and this is a dangerous, very dangerous thing to happen. You can fix this, but it's going to cost you or somebody else a lot of money. Unless you're really good with a welder, then I'd probably recommend going and having somebody else fix it for you, because yeah, you can see that bottom lip of the chassis there is starting to bend out, and the top's doing the same actually. So it won't be long for this truck's probably not even going to be attached to itself. So here's a great example of what to look for, because don't let it happen to you, or you probably better run the other way as fast as you can. Now obviously you'll have, rust spots and bubbling. Like this one's got, just absolutely nothing left of it. I can put my hand through there to the bed liner, stick my hand up in there, just absolutely garbage metal when it comes to strength, but I guess that's what Midwest Salt does to you. Another point for rusting, they like to rust out right there behind the headlights. I have no idea why, but that's a really nice strong suit for them to rust out at. This is the club cab setup, so it's not exactly the most roomy, but it's definitely a nice additive for storage. So if you just want a single cab and another space to throw your shit, there you go. I personally recommend a club or a quad cab, which is the 4-door, if you want to haul any resemblance of people or have a family with these trucks. Or if you just want a single cab, go a step above, get the club cab, because you'll wish you got the club cab. I rode in a single cab Dakota since I was a kid, and it sucked. So, yeah. Unless you want an RT or something light and going fast, then get you a club cab at least, because the space in these trucks is kind of very limited. So as for modifications on these trucks, if you're looking to buy one to modify it, whether it be lowering it, lifting it, pulling the engine, putting more horsepower in it, etc., etc., the list goes on. These trucks honestly aren't a bad platform to work with. The only downside is you're only sticking with a V8 in there. You can't really go much bigger than a V8 in the engine compartment. And even then, the engines that come in these, unless you have the old push rod engines like a 5.2 or 5.9, you're pretty limited to what you get. Realistically, the 4.7 has a decent amount of options to go and upgrade with, but it's not really that much of a good platform in the first place. You might be able to throw some HO cams, which are high output cams from the later generation 4.7s. You might be able to put them in there. You might be able to put a tuner in it and all that extra stuff. But the most you'll probably ever see out at your wheels will be about 300 horse, and that's even being conservative with my numbers. The 5.2 and 5.9, you can basically tear down and rebuild into stroker motors. So you can get some good power out of them with a good camshaft, whatever else have you come along with that. Tune them as well. That's about it. 3.9s and 3.7s. I personally wouldn't advocate for buying one, just simply because of the fact that they're gutless and they use the exact same fuel mileage as a V8. So just save yourself a little trouble, get the little extra power, and just go for a V8. You'll be a lot happier with that option in the long run. Unless you want to go for fuel economy with these trucks with the 4-cylinder, which is hard to find anyways, then by all means just go for the V8. You'll be happier at that decision. I know I was. And like I said, lifting and lowering these trucks, you can do it, but you're pretty limited to it, especially if it's the 4-wheel drive IFS. You can't really do much besides crank your torsion bars up with the stock stuff. You get maybe 2 extra inches of lift on the front, that's it. You can put an inch block lift on the rear there, little spacer blocks. You can get an inch lift block on the rear, and that's about it. Before you got to start really digging into suspension work and completely revamping your front IFS, and just the list goes on for stuff like that. Now for interiors, I really wish I could give you a good example, because this interior on this truck was actually pretty decent shape. The seats like to tear, especially on the driver's side. You might get a tear on the back left side towards the door there, especially on the upper cushion as well. Mine didn't really have that issue, so thankfully, cross my fingers, it never does. I still have the seats out of it. Passenger side, you pretty much won't ever see problems with it unless you have somebody sitting in there with you constantly, and even then, I haven't really seen much wear from stuff like that. Back seats are usually always in excellent shape. You might get the occasional tear in them, but they're pretty tough. Like I said, you won't be fitting many people back there anyways, so it'll just be mainly for what it's doing right now. The newer interior on these trucks, while we're talking about that, the newer interior on these trucks, I really like them. I used to love the old interiors and only the old interiors. But I gotta say, that third gen type interior for these Dakotas really grew on me because of how sleek and nice they were. The controls were all condensed. They weren't scattered everywhere, which they weren't really in the old one, but it's even better on the new one. Door panels were in much better shape and conditioning, a lot easier to take off. You had a little bit more storage with your glove box, although it wasn't by much. And you had the option of a center console with this, and it was an actual center console. You have cup holders, you could have a charger, you could have plenty of stuff on that center console. And of course the gauge cluster was quite a bit more condensed and in great shape than the old style was. Looked a little bit more futuristic, but other than that, it was pretty much the same rendition of it over again. The Durango's interior is quite a bit different, just simply because there's a lot more controls and doodabbers to hit in there. But it's pretty much the same concept, since the Durango was entirely based off the Dakota platform in the first place. And I guess while I'm talking about that, pretty much everything I'm saying about the Dakotas, you just look for on your Durango, minus the fact that you don't have a pickup bed. Because they're pretty much the exact same truck otherwise. There might be slight differences here and there, but other than that, they're pretty much identical vehicles. Especially since, like I said, it's just this truck with an SUV body. And especially in this case, pretty much from the back side of that door there forward, it's a Durango or Dakota. They're pretty much interchangeable. Once you get behind this door, it's all Dakota material from there. Another plus I'd like to add on to the engine and drivetrain material is that if you have a 2001 and later with the 4.7 and a 45 RFE, you can convert the transmission to a 545 RFE with literally just swapping this guy right here, this TCM computer. All you're doing is pretty much reprogram the transmission with a different computer. You pull the two screws, you pull the 2 or 3 screws to hold this guy in, out, you pull this connector out, obviously disconnecting your battery. You go get one out of a Jeep Grand Cherokee or a Dodge Dakota from 2003 or 4 with the 545 already installed. Put the computer in here, plug it back in, hook your batteries back up, and you pretty much will have a 5-speed transmission. To explain the difference between the 45 and the 545, the 45 is pretty much a 46 RE with more electronics for layman's terms. And then the 545 is the 45 RFE with 5 gears. You have 3 underdrive gears, a direct drive, you have 2 underdrive gears, a direct drive, and 2 overdrives. For where the 45 RFE is 2 underdrive gears, 1 direct, and 1 over. You're just adding an overdrive, basically, just by changing computers. I never did it to this truck, like I said, because it never lasted long enough. Now, would I personally go and buy this truck over again if I could, in better shape? Oh, yes, I would. If only I didn't have other projects, though. These trucks are pretty solid all around the unit. You just have to keep your eyes peeled for a few things. Like, rust is especially a big problem, and then slight mechanical issues, like, say, the transmissions and slight engine problems. But really, you can tell that straight out of the gate just by looking, when you go to start it up, by looking at signs. Like, if you can hear abnormal noises with the engine, if you can see smoke, more than likely your engine's probably getting worn out or shot, and you might not want to go near it if you don't want to spend money. Keyword there is if. If you're willing to spend money, then go ahead and buy it, I guess. The transmissions on these trucks is pretty much a matter of when it's going to fail, not a matter of if. Unless it's a 5-speed manual, then you're probably okay, and you'll be able to extend that question for quite a bit longer, because the only thing you really will have to worry about is changing oil in it every now and then at the clutch, which clutches don't happen very often anyways, so. Like I said, the drivetrain itself, so the front and rear setup, they're pretty much indestructible. The older style had mechanical, so you'll get a slight bit more reliability with that versus electronic in 2001 newer interiors. I'm not really opposed to electronic though, because mine's never failed me and I beat the living crap out of it, so I don't know, I'm pretty content with it regardless. Especially the rear end, if you have 2-wheel drive or 4-wheel drive, them rear ends are tough as nails. This is some pretty precarious filming here, considering I have 2 of those guys about ready to fly up to my face, so